Chapter 8, Supplier and Expenses, Part 2. In this chapter, you'll discover additional transactions and features that build upon the previous chapter on suppliers and expenses. The features that you'll learn in this section will help you handle common supplier types of transactions. In this chapter, you'll learn about credit card transactions, credit card payments and credits, supplier credits, and voiding and deleting supplier transactions. Credit cards in QuickBooks. Credit cards are a part of every small business. You can record credit card entries just like any other expense. To enter a credit card expense, click the Create menu, and then click Expenses. Enter the supplier you're paying. Next, choose the credit card account from the bank/credit account in the header of the transaction. Choose the account to track the expense. Enter the amount and then choose the sales tax. Add any other details in the memo or add an attachment of the receipt. After entering all of the necessary information, click to save. Making payments against credit cards. There are several ways to make payments against a credit card. The most efficient and the one that is most likely what a small business will do in the real world is the bank transfer. This is usually done after you make an online payment or transfer on your credit card. To make a payment using a transfer, click the Create menu and then click Transfer. Enter the transfer funds from account. This will be the payment account. Next, enter the transfer funds to account. This will be the credit card account. Enter the amount of the transfer or the payment. Next, enter a memo if required. Then click to save. That completes the credit card payment. This payment will now display on your credit card reconciliation. Credit card credits. If your students have to account for returns or credits on the credit card account, there is a specific transaction called the credit card credits to handle this. To enter this transaction, click the Create menu and then click Credit Card Credit. Complete the form in a similar way to completing a regular credit card entry. QuickBooks adds a credit card credit. This will display also in the credit card reconciliation. Click to save the transaction. Supplier credits. There may be times when your suppliers issue credits to be applied against outstanding bills. Credits can be issued for a variety of reasons. Whatever the reason, you'll be able to use the supplier credit transaction to record the credit. There are 2 steps in this process. After entering the credit, you must apply the credit against an outstanding bill to complete the process. First, to create the credit, click the Create menu. Then click Supplier Credit. Complete this form like you would any other bill. Choose the payee, enter the account, the amount, and sales tax. This information should be the same as the original bill. Finally, click to save. Next, you'll want to apply the credit against any outstanding bills. Once again, click the Create menu and then click Pay Bills. Select the bill to apply the credit against. QuickBooks automatically displays all available credits. You can choose to apply the entire amount of the credit or overwrite the amount to an amount of your choice. After entering the amount of the credit, you can also pay the bill at this point, but this is not necessary. You can use this transaction just for applying credits. You can let your students make the choice as needed. After complete the transaction, click to save. Voiding and deleting transactions. At times, you may need to delete or void expense transactions when mistakes are made or changes occur in the business. To edit or void a transaction, first find the transaction. This can be done using the search bar or on the Supplier Center under the Expenses tab. When you locate the transaction, click the More link in the footer section. Click Void to zero out the transaction, but keep a record. Click Delete to delete the transaction from QuickBooks. This will not keep a record of the transaction. Usually, it's recommended to void most transactions unless the student is sure that the transaction can be deleted. In the case of a check, you'll want to make sure that they choose to void the check and not delete it, as you would like to have a history of the check number. After making the appropriate selection, click to save. Recurring transactions. A recurring transaction template gives you a way to save transaction data without immediately creating a real transaction that affects your books. It is recurring because you can set it up to be a repeated transaction according to a frequency of your choice. You choose when to create the real transaction from a template. Recurring transactions are useful if you have transactions that occur often. The recurring transaction template saves time and prevents data entry errors. You can even save a template that includes only partial transaction data. For example, you can save the data that is appropriate for each monthly phone bill, but leave the amount blank to be filled in when you get the bill. You can also enter the data just once and have it repeated either automatically or after you are reminded. You can also just store templates in the recurring transactions for use as needed. You can create a recurring template for just about every type of transaction, such as invoices, checks, bills, and other transactions. The only types of transaction templates that are not allowed in QuickBooks are bill payments, customer payments, and time activities. To create a recurring expense transaction, go to the expense window. Create the expense as you normally would. After creating the expense, click Make Recurring at the bottom of the transaction window. Enter a template name. Usually this will correspond to the type of transaction. For example, if you were setting up an expense withdrawal from your bank account for monthly rent, I would enter monthly rent payment. Choose the type. You can choose one of the following. First, scheduled. This means that the entry will be entered according to a schedule and the interval that you set up on the template. Reminder. QuickBooks will remind you to make the entry instead of automatically entering it like the scheduled entry. Unscheduled. The entry will be on the recurring transactions list if you need it, but it will not remind you, nor will it automatically enter according to the schedule. After choosing the type, choose the interval. This is going to be the frequency that the transaction will be entered. Then enter the start and end dates. The start date is required, but the end date is optional. For example, on our monthly rent payment, perhaps our monthly rent payment will go on indefinitely. We will not have an end date, and therefore you don't have to enter one here. The rest of the transaction will be entered as it appears on the transaction form below. After reviewing the template and making sure everything is correct, click Save Template. QuickBooks saves the recurring transaction in the Recurring Transactions list. To view a list of all of the recurring entries in QuickBooks, click the gear icon and then click Recurring Transactions. QuickBooks displays the list. From here, you can use any of the recurring entries at any time.